I'm so glad you're here. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a 69-year-old widow, and for my entire life, I believed that a mother's love was the most powerful thing in the world. When my son and his wife dragged me to court to prove I was incompetent just to take my home, I was devastated. But the moment that truly broke me was when my daughter-in-law looked the judge in the eye and called me a gold digger. She thought she had won. What she didn't know was that my best friend of 40 years was about to take the stand with a secret recording that would destroy her entire world. If you believe in justice, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story from. I want to know how far the truth can travel. The silence in my kitchen the morning after Thanksgiving was heavier than 1,000 accusations. It was the first holiday since my husband David had passed, and the quiet he left behind was a ghost I still hadn't learned to live with. The air, thick with the lingering scent of leftover pumpkin pie and fresh coffee, felt empty, without the sound of his newspaper rustling or the scrape of his favorite chair against the hardwood floor he had laid himself. My gaze drifted toward the doorway of his home office, to the old locked file cabinet he'd always called his rainy day chest. I hadn't touched it in a year, wondering if the answers to my loneliness were hidden in its cold steel drawers. My laptop was open on the oak table, displaying my monthly budget. The numbers were tight, as they always were on my retired librarian's pension, but manageable. Or they would have been. I sighed, a familiar weight settling in my chest as I clicked through to my bank's website. Leo's text from the night before was still fresh in my mind. "Mom, car is making that noise again. Garage says it's the transmission this time, so sorry to ask." I typed in the amount, $500, and set the transfer for November 28th, 2025. This was the third unexpected car repair in 6 months, and it was draining the nest egg David and I had worked our entire lives to build. With a click, the money was gone, and so was my peace of mind for the month. Not 10 minutes later, my phone rang, Leo's picture flashing on the screen. I answered, expecting his usual apologetic tone, but Emily's saccharine voice came through first. "Elizabeth, you are an absolute angel. Leo just told me. I don't know what we'd do without you." I could hear Leo murmur something in the background. "I'm just glad I can help," I said, the words tasting like a lie. "Oh, it's more than a help, it's a lifesaver," Emily gushed. "Things are just so tight. With Leo working from home now, this tiny one-bedroom apartment is just not working for us, you know? We can barely turn around." The hint was as subtle as a sledgehammer. I closed my eyes, picturing the spacious, sunlit rooms of my own home. After a few more minutes of her cloying gratitude and Leo's mumbled affirmations, I politely ended the call. I walked into the living room, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. My eyes fell on a framed photo on the mantelpiece, the last one David and I ever took, on our 40th anniversary. His arm was wrapped around me, his smile so full of pride in our life, in the home he had built with his own 2 hands, in the future we thought we would share for decades more. A sharp pang of guilt pierced my heart. I was letting him down, letting our carefully built legacy be chipped away, $500 at a time. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. "Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You're a lifesaver. We were thinking maybe we could all sit down and talk about a more permanent solution to our housing problem soon." The word permanent chilled me to the bone. It didn't sound like a suggestion, it sounded like a plan. The family meeting Emily had suggested arrived a week later, on Sunday, December 5th, not as a gentle conversation over coffee, but as an ambush in my own living room. Leo walked in first, avoiding my eyes as he mumbled a hello and immediately turned on the television. The roar of a football game filled the space, a loud artificial barrier against the silence that stretched between us. Emily followed, placing a pristine leather tote bag on the floor beside her, her smile as bright and brittle as a Christmas ornament. The air grew thick with unspoken intentions and the bitter taste of Emily's words from Thanksgiving. This house has great bones. It's a shame it's just sitting here," came rushing back to me. She began with flattery, her voice smooth and practiced. "Elizabeth, you are truly the most independent woman I know. The way you've managed everything since David, it's just incredible." I offered a tight smile, waiting for the inevitable pivot. It came quickly. "But that's just it. Leo and I are concerned," she said, her brow furrowing with a performance of deep worry. "This big house, all the upkeep, the yard, and the stairs, Elizabeth. We worry constantly. What if you fell and no one was around to help?" Her words were coated in sugar, but they felt like a condescending pat on the head, as if my 69 years of life had suddenly rendered me helpless. From her tote bag, she produced a set of glossy brochures, fanning them out on the coffee table David had built from a single piece of reclaimed pecan wood. "So, we did some research," she announced proudly. The cover of the top brochure showed a group of silver-haired seniors laughing around a card table. Oakwood Meadows, a new chapter in gracious living. "Look," Emily said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on a photo. "They have a heated pool, a book club, and a shuttle that takes you shopping. Plus, there's a 24/7 medical staff right on site. You'd be so safe, so cared for." I picked up the brochure. The paper was heavy, expensive, and there, in the fine print at the bottom of the back page, I saw it. For a confidential consultation, contact Harrison and Lowe, Elder Estate Planning. The name of the law firm felt like a cold stone dropping into my stomach. "Leo, honey, tell her the best part," Emily prompted, turning to my son, who'd been staring blankly at the television. He flinched, as if waking from a trance, and cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, his voice strained, "we had a realtor do a quiet appraisal. The house, with the way the neighborhood is now, it's worth a lot. More than enough to pay for a place like Oakwood for the rest of your life, with plenty left over." He paused, took a deep breath, and delivered the final blow. "And, well, with what's left, it would be enough for us to finally get a down payment on a place of our own. A real house. A place for your future grandkids to run around in." The room fell silent. The only sound the distant cheers from the football game. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My home wasn't just a burden to them, it was a resource, an obstacle standing in the way of their ambitions. Emily leaned forward, placing her hand over mine. Her touch was cold. "Think of it, Elizabeth," she said sweetly, her eyes gleaming. "You'd be securing your future and ours all at once. It's the perfect plan." I looked from my son's pleading face to my daughter-in-law's expectant smile, and I realized this wasn't a discussion. It was a demand, and I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of quiet dread, the assisted living brochures sitting on my coffee table like a coiled snake. Every morning, I'd make my tea and sit in my favorite armchair, intending to read, only to find my eyes fixed on that glossy pile of paper. They were a physical manifestation of the ambush, a constant reminder that my home, my life, was now a subject for negotiation. More than once, I found myself staring at the door to David's locked file cabinet, his words echoing in my memory from a lifetime ago. "Everything you'll ever need to protect yourself is in here, Liz. Don't open it unless you have to." I wasn't at that point yet, but I was getting dangerously close. The anxiety became a constant companion, a tightening in my chest that wouldn't go away. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I called Susan. We met at the Daily Grind, our favorite local coffee shop for the last 30 years. The familiar smell of roasted coffee beans and the low hum of conversation were a comfort, a small pocket of normalcy in a world that had tilted on its axis. I explained the situation to her, my voice low, the words tumbling out in a rush of confusion and pain. I heard myself making excuses for them. "I'm sure they just mean well, Susan. They're worried about me being alone." I tried to frame it as their misguided concern, but even as I said it, the words felt hollow and false. Susan listened patiently, her sharp, intelligent eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. She took a slow sip of her latte, placed the cup down with a decisive click, and leaned forward. "Concern?" she said, her voice laced with an icy clarity that cut right through my fog of doubt. "Elizabeth, that's not concern. That's a real estate transaction. They want your house. Period." The bluntness of her words was jarring, but it was also liberating. "You are not a helpless old woman," she continued, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "You are the woman who raised a son on her own while nursing a sick husband. You ran this household, managed the finances, and you have a mind as sharp as anyone I know. Do not let them make you believe otherwise." Her words were like a splash of cold, clean water. She was right. I wasn't the fragile, confused person they were trying to paint me as. I was Elizabeth Vance, and this was my life. A surge of forgotten strength flooded through me. Right there, in the middle of the coffee shop, I took out my phone and dialed Leo's number. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" His voice was laced with an expectant hope that turned my stomach. "I'm fine, Leo," I said, my own voice steady and firm in a way it hadn't been for weeks. "I've had some time to think about your and Emily's proposal. My answer is no. I will not be selling my home. This conversation is over." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a long, weary sigh. The hope in his voice was replaced by a tight, clipped disappointment. "I see," he said. "Emily is not going to be happy about this, Mom. She really thought you'd do the right thing for the family." The line went dead. I put my phone down. A wave of cold fury washing over me. The right thing for their family. An hour later, back in the deceptive quiet of my living room, a sleek black car I'd never seen before pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit got out, holding a large manila envelope. My heart sank as he walked up my driveway. The manila envelope wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of war. The process server, a young man with indifferent eyes, had simply asked, "Elizabeth Vance?" before thrusting the thick packet into my hands and turning away without another word. I closed the door, my home suddenly feeling like a fragile fortress under siege. My hands trembled as I sat in the living room, the weight of the envelope heavy on my lap. At the top of the first page, the letterhead was stark and cruel. Harrison and Lowe, Elder Estate Planning, the name of the law firm from the assisted living brochure. They had been planning this for a while. The document was a petition for conservatorship, dated Friday, December 19th, 2025. I read the words, but my mind struggled to grasp their meaning. The clinical, legal jargon was a language from another world, a cold weapon designed to dismantle mine. It was filled with lies and grotesque exaggerations, painting a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. It claimed I was forgetful, citing a time I'd misplaced my car keys. It alleged I was unable to manage my finances, referencing my simple, frugal lifestyle as proof. It described my home, my sanctuary, as a hazardous environment due to clutter and outdated fixtures. The most brutal phrases leaped off the page, designed to wound, lacks the mental capacity to make sound financial decisions, susceptible to undue influence. My breath hitched as I flipped through the pages, my heart sinking further with each one. Then I saw them, the signed affidavits. Emily's was first, a masterpiece of feigned concern and crocodile tears. But it was the page after that, the one bearing my son's familiar signature, that shattered me. I read his words, the words of the boy I had raised, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose heartbreaks I had mended. "My mother has become a danger to herself," Leo had written. "Her memory lapses and erratic behavior are a constant source of worry. We believe she needs professional oversight for her own protection. It has become a burden we can no longer watch her bear alone. A burden. That was what I was to him. The betrayal was absolute, a clean, deep cut that severed something vital inside me. Numb with shock, I fumbled for my phone and dialed Susan. Her cheerful hello was a sound from a different, happier universe. I couldn't form a sentence. I just choked out her name. Elizabeth, what is it? What's happened? Her voice sharpened with alarm. Through broken sobs, I read her the words from Leo's affidavit. I read her the legal phrases meant to declare me a non-person. There was a moment of stark silence on the other end of the line, and when Susan spoke again, her voice was not filled with pity. It was a low, dangerous growl. "That little witch," she snarled. "She did this. She turned him into this." Another pause. Then her voice was steel. "Okay, Elizabeth. No more crying. We fight. First thing tomorrow, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A shark." I hung up the phone. Susan's fury a spark in the cold emptiness of my shock. It was then that the heartbreak began to curdle, hardening into a cold, heavy knot of anger in the pit of my stomach. They didn't just want my house. They wanted to erase me, to strip me of my identity, my mind, my very right to exist as an independent person. They wanted to declare me legally dead while I was still breathing. Wiping the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand, I stood up. My legs were steady. My resolve was firm. I walked with a new, measured purpose towards David's old office. It was time to see what was in that rainy day chest. The key to David's file cabinet was exactly where he'd always kept it, taped to the underside of his old wooden desk chair. My fingers, clumsy with a strange mix of reverence and urgency, fumbled with the brittle, yellowed tape before pulling the small brass key free. The air in his office was still and thick with the scent of old books and dried ink, a sanctuary of memory that had remained untouched since his passing. With a deep breath, I knelt before the cold metal cabinet, inserted the key, and turned. The lock gave a satisfying click, a sound that felt like permission. I finally opened the rainy day chest David had told me to protect. There was no hidden treasure, no stacks of cash. It was just David, perfectly organized and preserved in manila folders. Meticulously filed tax returns going back 20 years, appliance warranties for a washing machine we'd replaced a decade ago, his personal papers. I sifted through them, my heart aching with a fresh wave of loss. Every neat label and paper-clipped receipt was a testament to the careful, steady man he had been. My fingers paused on a folder labeled simply, "Family Loans." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't remembered giving them any loans, only gifts. I pulled it out. On top was a pale blue copy of a cashier's check. The date was from October of 2023, just over 2 years ago. The recipient was Leo Vance. The amount, written out in the bank's crisp font, was $20,000. In the memo line, in David's familiar steady script were 4 words: down payment, our gift. The memory hit me then. Not a loan, but a gift to help them buy their first reliable car. I had forgotten the exact amount, but seeing it now, realizing the depth of the generosity they were now repaying with such cruelty, felt like a fresh wound. I had given them so much more than I even remembered. Behind the check, I found something that didn't belong, a thick stack of envelopes held together by a rubber band. They were addressed to Leo and Emily, but at my address. The mail carrier must have made a mistake, bundling them with my mail months ago. I had set them aside, meaning to give them to Leo, and then forgotten. They were all from the same sender, the logo a stark, intimidating emblem in the top corner, Westgate Debt Recovery. My blood ran cold. I slid one from the stack. It was heavy, official. It had already been opened, the seal torn, perhaps by David before he had passed. My hands trembling, I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The words were blunt, merciless, final notice, legal action pending. I scanned the text, my eyes searching for the reason, the number, and then I found it. The outstanding balance on a defaulted high-interest personal loan, taken out by both Leo Vance and Emily Vance, was $50,212. The date on the letter was less than 2 months ago. I sank to the floor, the cold of the wood seeping through my clothes, the letter shaking in my hand. $50,000. This wasn't about wanting a bigger house. This wasn't about misguided concern for my well-being. They weren't just greedy, they were drowning. And they saw my home as their lifeboat. Armed with the truth about their debt, every past interaction with Emily took on a sinister new meaning. Her compliments about my home now sounded like appraisals. Her questions about my health felt like assessments of my vulnerability. Her sweet-talking gratitude for the money I'd given them was the calculated praise of a predator, grooming its prey. As Susan and I drove to the lawyer's office the next morning, her words from weeks ago echoed in my mind. "That's not concern, Elizabeth. That's a real estate transaction." She was more right than she knew. It wasn't just a transaction. It was a hostile takeover. The law office of Mr. Davies was a sterile, intimidating space of dark mahogany and leather-bound books. It smelled of old paper and quiet money, a world far removed from my cozy, lived-in home. I felt small and out of my depth, but Susan, ever my rock, sat beside me, her posture radiating a confidence I didn't feel. She was the one who placed the conservatorship petition and the debt collection letter on the lawyer's enormous desk. Mr. Davies, a professional and competent man in his 50s, reviewed the documents with a practiced, impassive expression. "The letter establishes a clear motive, which is good," he said, his tone cautious. "It shows desperation. But in these cases, the court's primary concern isn't motive. The burden of proof is on us to demonstrate your competence. And that," he paused, looking at me over the top of his reading glasses, "is the main battle." He went on to outline the process, and with each word, the knot in my stomach tightened. There would be a court-appointed psychological evaluation, depositions where their lawyer would grill me for hours, and witness testimonies. "You have to understand," Mr. Davies said gently, "judges tend to err on the side of caution when elderly welfare is invoked. Your son and daughter-in-law will present themselves as the loving, concerned family, and you, well, they will try to paint you as a confused woman in denial. It won't be easy." His realistic assessment was terrifying. I had naively believed the truth would be enough, but I was beginning to understand this was a game, a performance, with rules I had never learned. The first blow came sooner than I expected. As Susan and I were leaving the office, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun, I ran into Martha Gable, a neighbor I'd known for 20 years. Her face, usually so cheerful, was etched with a deep, pitying concern. "Oh, Elizabeth, dear," she said, her voice a hushed whisper as she patted my arm. "I was so sorry to hear you haven't been... Well, Leo and Emily are just so worried about you." The words, meant to be kind, struck me with the force of a physical blow. The gossip network had already been activated. They were laying the groundwork, poisoning my community against me. The neighbor's pitying look was more painful than a direct accusation. In that moment, I realized they weren't just attacking me in court with lawyers and documents. They were assassinating my character on the streets where I had lived my life, turning my own community into a jury that had already convicted me. Back home, the walls of my house felt like they were closing in. I sank into my armchair, the lawyer's warnings and Martha's pitying face swirling in my head, a toxic cocktail of fear and humiliation. I felt utterly defeated before the fight had even truly begun. Just then, my phone rang. It was Susan. Her voice wasn't sympathetic, it was low, conspiratorial, and crackling with a defiant energy. "I have an idea," she said. "It's crazy, but it might just work. Are you willing to play a role?" Susan's plan was as simple as it was terrifying. She was going to walk straight into the lion's den. My role in this psychological drama was to sit by the phone and wait, a task that felt infinitely harder than taking any action. For 2 days, I paced my quiet house, the legal papers on my dining table, a constant ugly reminder of the fight ahead. I thought back to all the times Emily had sat in my living room, her voice dripping with false sympathy, trying to portray herself as my friend and confidant. Now, Susan was going to use that same tactic against her. It was a bitter sort of poetry, a war fought with the enemy's own weapons. The call came on Wednesday afternoon. "Okay, it's done." Susan's voice was low and tight, buzzing with adrenaline. "I'm back in my car." I sank into my armchair, my knuckles white from gripping the phone. "What happened? Did she believe you?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Like a charm," Susan said with a grim satisfaction. She described the cafe, a trendy, overpriced place called the Daily Bloom, where young women took pictures of their avocado toast. The atmosphere, she said, was loud and superficial, the perfect stage for Emily's performance. Susan had timed her entrance perfectly, bumping into Emily near the counter. "I started by telling her how worried I was about you," Susan recounted, her voice mimicking the concerned, slightly dithering tone she must have used. "I told her, 'Emily, dear, this is so hard, but between us, I think what you and Leo are doing, it's for the best. Elizabeth just hasn't been herself lately.'" There was a pause as I absorbed the sting of hearing my best friend voice the enemy's lies. "At first, she was wary," Susan continued, "but her ego is a mile wide. The idea that someone from your generation was on her side was too tempting to resist." According to Susan, Emily had launched into a self-pitying monologue about how stubborn and ungrateful I was being. "You have no idea, Susan," Emily had complained over her $4 cup of coffee. "We are trying to give her a beautiful, safe retirement, and she's acting like we're monsters. It's all for her own good, but she can't see it." Susan had expertly steered the conversation, nodding and agreeing with every word, validating every twisted justification Emily offered. "Oh, I know, dear," Susan had said, her performance sounding horribly convincing even to me. "It's so hard when they get to that age. They can't see what's best for them." That's when Susan had laid the final piece of the trap. She was completely convinced I was on her side, Susan explained to me, her voice dropping lower. So I leaned in and said, "Listen, maybe I can help. I could talk to her, woman to woman. Soften her up. Maybe I can help you convince her to let go and accept your help." I held my breath, waiting. "Elizabeth, you should have seen her face," Susan said, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. It lit up like a Christmas tree. She took the bait completely. Her exact words were, "That would be amazing, Susan. You get it. You see how difficult she's being." A wave of something, part relief, part nausea, washed over me. Susan had done it. She had infiltrated their defenses. "She trusts me," Susan said, her voice now deadly serious. "Now I just need to set the stage. The next time we meet, I'll be ready." The week leading up to Susan's next meeting with Emily was the longest of my life. I existed in a state of suspended animation, every waking moment a battle against the dread that churned in my stomach. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. I expected it to be my lawyer with bad news, or worse, my son calling to issue another hollow, manipulative apology. The appointment for my court-appointed psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for the following Tuesday, a day that loomed over me like a guillotine. The office was exactly as I'd imagined, cold, impersonal, and smelling faintly of disinfectant. The walls were a sterile shade of beige, decorated with generic prints of sailboats and landscapes. It was a room designed to have no personality, a place where people were reduced to case files and symptoms. Dr. Miller was a neutral, professional man in his late 50s, with eyes that revealed nothing. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that was surprisingly uncomfortable, and for the next 3 hours he subjected me to a grueling, methodical interrogation. He began with questions clearly fed to him from Leo and Emily's petition. "Mrs. Vance, can you tell me what you had for breakfast yesterday?" he asked, his pen poised over a notepad. "1 piece of whole wheat toast with strawberry jam and a cup of black coffee," I answered calmly. "It's what I have every morning." He moved on. "Your son expressed concern over your financial decisions. Can you explain the transfer of $500 you made last month?" I looked him straight in the eye. "That was a gift to my son for a car repair, one of several he has requested over the last year. It was my money to give." He probed deeper, circling the claims of my supposed confusion. "Your son states you often become emotional when discussing your late husband. Can you elaborate?" The question was a trap, an attempt to pathologize my grief. "My husband and I were married for 45 years, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "I believe missing him is a normal human response, not a symptom of mental incompetence. My husband and I also believed in living below our means, not because we had to, but because we chose to. That is prudence, doctor, not confusion." As he scribbled his notes, my mind drifted to Susan. I imagined her making the call to Emily, her voice a perfect blend of warmth and conspiracy. "Emily, dear, I was thinking, that conversation we had was so helpful, but I felt like we were constantly being interrupted. Why don't you come over to my house tomorrow? We can talk freely there, without any interruptions." It was a brilliant move, offering Emily the illusion of a secret alliance, a safe space to unload her venom. I was pulled back to the present by Dr. Miller's voice. "We're almost done here, Mrs. Vance." When the 3 hours were finally over, I was emotionally and mentally exhausted. I had answered every question, provided every date, and defended every decision with the precision of a librarian cataloging her life's work. I looked at Dr. Miller, searching his impassive face for any sign, any hint of how I had done. He simply closed his notepad, capped his pen, and stood up. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice as neutral as it had been at the start. "My report will be submitted to the court." The uncertainty was agonizing. I left his office with no idea if I had saved myself or simply provided them with more ammunition. That evening, as I sat staring into a cup of tea I hadn't touched, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Susan. "She's coming over tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'm ready. Wish me luck." While Susan was meeting with Emily, I sat in my lawyer's office, feeling utterly powerless. Mr. Davies was talking, explaining legal precedents and filing deadlines, but his voice was a distant drone. All I could focus on was the slow, deliberate tick of the clock on his wall. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. Emily was there. She was in Susan's house. My hands were clammy, and I reached into my purse, my fingers finding the worn edges of the photo of David I kept in my wallet, the one from our last anniversary. His smiling eyes seemed to look right at me. "Protect yourself, Liz," I could almost hear him say. I clutched it like a talisman, praying Susan's plan would work. I could picture it so clearly. Susan's bright, welcoming sunroom, filled with ferns and orchids, the afternoon light streaming through the large windows. It was the least threatening room I could imagine. She had told me where she'd hidden the small digital recorder, tucked behind a pot of African violets on a bookshelf. She welcomed Emily with a warm hug and a pot of chamomile tea. "I'm so glad you came," I imagined Susan saying, her voice a perfect blend of concern and conspiracy. I tried talking to Elizabeth again after her evaluation, but honestly, Emily, she's just not listening to reason. Feeling safe and superior, Emily would have launched into her tirade. I could almost hear her entitled, whining tone. "You have no idea, Susan. It's like talking to a brick wall. She's selfish. She's hoarding all that money, all that equity in the house, while Leo and I are struggling just to get by. Her ideas are so outdated. She doesn't understand the modern world or the kind of financial pressure we're under. We're doing this for her own good, and she's treating us like criminals." Susan, playing her part to perfection, would just nod and pour more tea, her face a mask of sympathy, letting Emily dig her own grave, word by venomous word. Then would come the gentle prod, the question that would spring the trap. "But the lawsuit," I pictured Susan asking, her brow furrowed as if in genuine doubt. "Are you sure it's the right way? It seems so aggressive. What if the court doesn't believe she's incompetent? What if the judge sides with her?" Emily would have scoffed then, a dismissive, arrogant sound. She would lean forward, her voice dropping, absolutely certain that she was confiding in a trusted ally. And then she would say the words that would be her undoing. "Oh, please," I imagined her whispering, the sound as clear in my mind as if I were in the room. "She's as sharp as a tack. We all know that. But what else are we supposed to do? She won't give us the house. The lawyers said this is the quickest way. We just have to make her look like a confused old woman. It's not even that hard." I saw Susan sitting back, her face unchanged, still a perfect mask of sympathy, offering another biscuit she knew Emily wouldn't eat. Inside, she would be victorious. She had it. She had the weapon that would bring Emily's world crashing down. "Elizabeth," Mr. Davies' voice cut through my thoughts. "Are you with me?" I blinked, the sunroom fading and the sterile law office coming back into focus. "Yes," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "I'm sorry, I was just thinking." Just then my phone buzzed on the table between us. My heart leaped. It was a text from Susan. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was a single, beautiful word. Got her. The recording was a ticking bomb, and we had 1 week until it was set to explode in the courtroom. For the first time in months, the dread that had been my constant companion was replaced by a sharp, nervous energy. I finally understood what David meant by his rainy day chest. It wasn't about the money he'd left me. It was about the tools for a fight you never wanted, the evidence and resolve needed to protect the life you'd built. The debt collection letters had been the key, and Susan's recording was the weapon it had unlocked. The next morning, we met in Mr. Davies' office. The atmosphere was entirely different from our last visit. The sterile intimidation was gone, replaced by a focused, strategic energy. We were no longer a desperate woman and her worried friend. We were a legal team preparing for battle. I felt less like a victim and more like an active participant in my own defense, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Susan, proud and determined, placed her small smartphone on the polished mahogany desk as if it were a loaded pistol. "Mr. Davies," she said, "I think you'll want to hear this." He was skeptical at first, adjusting his glasses and giving Susan a cautious look, but as she pressed play, his expression shifted. I watched his eyebrows rise, his professional mask crumbling as Emily's arrogant, conspiratorial voice filled the quiet office. When the recording reached the damning confession, "She's as sharp as a tack. We all know that. We just have to make her look like a confused old woman." Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He let the recording finish, the silence in the room afterward buzzing with potential. "Well," he said, the single word dripping with satisfaction, "that's not just a smoking gun. That is a silver bullet." "Is it legal?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Can we use it?" "Thankfully." "Texas is a one-party consent state," he explained, his energy completely transformed. "Since Susan was a party to the conversation, her recording of it is perfectly admissible. Our strategy is now clear. We'll put Susan on the stand as a character witness for you. Their lawyer will try to discredit her, paint her as just another confused old friend. He will challenge her testimony, and that is when we will introduce this." He tapped the phone, his smile widening. "It will corroborate her testimony and detonate their entire case." He spent the next hour prepping Susan, walking her through the sequence of questions. "They will attack your credibility," he warned her. "They'll ask, so you're asking this court to take your word for it, Mrs. Jenkins. And you will say, 'It's not just my word, sir.' You will be calm, you will be clear, and you will let me handle the rest." The trap was now fully set, a precise legal mechanism waiting to be sprung. But as the meeting concluded, Mr. Davies turned his attention to me, his expression turning serious once more. He looked at me, his gaze direct and unsparing. "Elizabeth," he said, "this plan only works if we get to Susan's testimony. Before that, you will be on the stand. They are going to try to destroy you. They will twist your words, use your grief against you, and paint you as a liar, a manipulator, a gold digger. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Can you handle it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and absolute. This was my battle to endure. I met his gaze, the image of Emily's smug, condescending face flashing in my mind, the sound of her cruel words echoing in my memory. I took a deep, steadying breath. "Let them try," I said. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into an arena. The air was cold and still, smelling of old wood and floor polish. The ceiling soared high above, and the dark, imposing judge's bench felt like an altar for a sacrifice. My sacrifice. I took my seat beside Mr. Davies, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. Across the room, I saw Leo look at me, just for a fleeting second, before his eyes darted away. It was the same guilty, avoidant look he'd had in my living room weeks ago. He knew this was wrong. Emily sat beside him, the picture of serene concern, her hand resting on his arm in a show of support that was as false as her smile. In the gallery behind me, I felt Susan's presence, a small, warm anchor in this cold, hostile sea. She was a silent promise of the storm to come. Emily and Leo's lawyer, a slick and aggressive man named Mr. Peterson, began his opening statement. His voice was smooth and condescending, filled with a practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. "This isn't a case of malice, Your Honor," he began, gesturing toward my son and his wife. "It is a tragedy, a case of a loving son and his wife trying to protect a mother who is, sadly, losing her grip on reality. We are here today to ask the court to provide the protection that Mrs. Vance is no longer capable of providing for herself." He wove a masterful tale of my supposed cognitive decline, a slow descent into confusion and paranoia that existed only in his legal strategy. His first witness was a psychologist, a Dr. Evans, who had never met me. Mr. Peterson led him through a series of hypothetical questions, each one a thinly veiled description of my life. "Doctor," he asked, "is a sudden fixation on frugality to the point of neglecting necessary home repairs a potential sign of cognitive decline?" "It can be," the doctor replied smoothly. "It's often linked to paranoia or an inability to assess risk." "And what about social withdrawal?" Peterson pressed. "A reluctance to engage with family, preferring isolation." "That is also a common and concerning symptom in the elderly," Dr. Evans affirmed. "They were taking my virtues, my prudence, my love of a quiet life, and twisting them into symptoms of a disease." Then he called my son to the stand. Leo walked slowly, his shoulders slumped, refusing to look at me. His testimony was weak, coached, and devastating. Peterson led him gently. "Leo, can you tell the court about the incident with the gas stove?" Leo swallowed hard. She left it on," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "We smelled it when we came over. The whole house was full of gas. It could have been a disaster." It was a complete and utter lie, a fabrication so cruel it took my breath away. He went on to describe my forgetfulness, how I'd supposedly missed a doctor's appointment he'd made for me, how I couldn't remember the name of his new colleague. Each lie was a small, sharp cut delivered by the person I loved most in the world. When Peterson was finished for the day, he stood before the judge, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your Honor," he said with a conclusive finality, As you can see, this is a clear-cut case. Mrs. Vance needs protection from herself. The judge, a man with tired eyes, looked over at me. His expression wasn't angry or skeptical. It was one of pity. The story was working. The momentum was entirely against me. In that moment, a terrifying wave of hopelessness washed over me. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. Mr. Davies leaned over, his voice a grim whisper against the shuffling of papers as the court adjourned. "Tomorrow you're on the stand. He's going to do to you what he just did to the truth, but 10 times worse. It's going to be brutal. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, the fate of my life hanging in the balance. The witness stand felt like the loneliest place on earth, encased in polished wood, with a microphone that seemed to amplify the frantic beating of my own heart. I sat under the cold, impartial gaze of the judge and a room full of strangers. All the lies and exaggerations from the lawsuit petition, once just ink on paper, were now about to be thrown at me, one by one, in a public forum. Under Mr. Davies' gentle questioning, I stated my case simply. I spoke of my love for the home David had built, the garden I tended, and the quiet independence that I cherished. I explained that I was perfectly capable of managing my life, that I volunteered at the local library twice a week, and that my finances, while modest, were in perfect order. My voice was steady, my answers truthful. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Then Mr. Peterson rose for his cross-examination. He approached the stand like a predator circling its prey, a thin, predatory smile on his lips. He started by twisting my love for my home into a sickness. "Mrs. Vance, you seem to have an unhealthy attachment to this property, don't you? You would rather live in a house full of memories than ensure your own safety in a modern facility. Is that correct?" He moved on to my lifestyle, his questions dripping with condescension. "You testified that you manage your own budget. Is it true that you haven't bought a new winter coat in over 10 years? Would you call that sound financial management, Mrs. Vance, or the behavior of someone who is losing their grasp on practical matters?" He tried to trip me up on dates and names, peppering me with questions designed to make me seem confused. "You mentioned a doctor's appointment you had last spring. What was the exact date?" "You don't recall?" "Interesting." Each question was a small, sharp cut, designed not to find truth, but to bleed my credibility dry in front of the court. I remained dignified, but I was emotionally battered. When it was finally over, Emily was called to the stand. Her performance was breathtaking. She wore a simple, modest dress and dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she spoke. Her voice was a soft, trembling testament to her supposed pain. "I love Elizabeth," she said, her voice cracking. "I have always seen her as my own mother. That's what makes this so incredibly painful for us." She described her desperate attempts to help, painting a picture of me as a stubborn, irrational woman who rejected their love at every turn. "I brought her brochures for a beautiful, safe community," she sobbed, "a place where she would have friends and care, and she threw them back in my face. We just don't know what else to do." Her lawyer let her tears subside before asking his final, leading question. "Emily," he said softly, "in your opinion, with all the love you have for her, why do you think Elizabeth is so resistant to accepting your help?" Emily paused, taking a shaky breath and looking directly at the judge with wide, tear-filled eyes that pleaded for understanding. "Because," she whispered, her voice trembling with fake emotion, "because deep down, she knows she doesn't deserve it." Mr. Davies and I both stiffened. Peterson leaned in. "What do you mean by that?" Emily took one last shuddering breath and delivered the final blow, her voice now carrying a note of tragic, damning pity. "She was always a gold digger. She married my husband's father for this house, and now she won't let go." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I felt the blood drain from my face, the room tilting around me. The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly disconnected from the 45 years I had loved and cared for my husband, that I couldn't even breathe. My own lawyer looked stunned, his mouth slightly agape. Across the room, Leo stared at the floor, his face pale with shame. From the gallery, I saw Susan rise slowly to her feet, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. As Susan was called to the stand, a quiet confidence replaced the tremor in my hands. The end game had begun. She walked with a steady, unhurried grace, her back straight, her expression calm. I looked at Emily, who shot Susan a dismissive smirk, utterly unaware that she was looking at the woman who was about to detonate her entire life. Susan took the oath, her voice clear and strong, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Davies began gently, establishing Susan's credibility, our friendship of over 40 years, her weekly visits, her intimate knowledge of my life. "In all the years you've known her, Mrs. Jenkins," he asked, "have you ever found Elizabeth Vance to be forgetful or confused?" "Never," Susan said firmly. "Elizabeth has the sharpest mind of anyone I know. She does the Sunday crossword in ink and has been balancing her own checkbook to the penny for the 45 years I've known her." Mr. Peterson, Emily's lawyer, rose for his cross-examination, his movements slick and reptilian. "Mrs. Jenkins," he began with a condescending smile, "you and Mrs. Vance are old friends. Isn't that right? You're of a similar age. Isn't it possible that you simply don't recognize cognitive decline when you see it? That you're just two old friends covering for each other?" Susan's smile was thin and dangerous. "I recognize manipulation when I see it, Mr. Peterson, and I am an expert in that thanks to your client." Mr. Davies stood for his redirect. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'd like to direct your attention to a conversation you had with Emily Vance last week. Can you tell the court what was discussed?" Susan recounted the conversation she had with Emily, calmly and methodically describing how Emily had admitted that the lawsuit was a sham. She detailed how Emily had called me stubborn and selfish for not wanting to sell my home to finance their lifestyle. Peterson was on his feet instantly. "Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. This is a complete fabrication. This witness is lying." The judge looked at Susan, then at my lawyer. "The objection is sustained. Mrs. Jenkins, you cannot testify about what she said unless—" Mr. Davies didn't let him finish. He turned back to Susan, his voice ringing with purpose. "Mrs. Jenkins, do you have anything to substantiate your testimony regarding that conversation?" Susan turned her calm gaze from the lawyers and looked directly at the judge. The entire courtroom leaned in. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. "I have an audio recording of the entire conversation." Pandemonium erupted. Peterson was shouting about privacy laws and illegal recordings. Emily's face had gone from smug confidence to ashen disbelief. Mr. Davies calmly addressed the judge. "Your Honor, as you know, Texas is a one-party consent state. The recording is perfectly admissible." The judge stared at Peterson, his expression hardening, his earlier pity for Emily evaporating. "Objection overruled," he snapped. "The court will hear the recording." My heart hammered against my ribs as the bailiff connected Susan's phone to the courtroom speakers. There was a crackle of static, and then Susan's voice, clear as a bell, offering Emily tea. The room was deathly quiet. I watched Emily's face. Confusion turned to dawning horror as her own voice, tinny and arrogant, filled the room. I saw her eyes widen, her hand flying to her mouth. Leo looked like he had been turned to stone. Then came the final devastating words, her own voice, a conspiratorial whisper sealing her fate. "Oh, please, she's as sharp as a tack. We all know that. But what else are we supposed to do? She won't give us the house. The lawyers said this is the quickest way. We just have to make her look like a confused old woman. It's not even that hard." The recording ended. A deafening silence hung in the air, thick and heavy with the toxic truth. No one moved, no one breathed. Emily was frozen, a statue of pure terror. The judge stared down at her, his face no longer tired or pitiful, but a mask of cold, controlled fury. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of ice. "Bailiff," he said, his voice like steel, "take Ms. Vance into custody." Watching Emily being led away in handcuffs wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of profound and terrible sadness. Her face, stripped of its arrogant confidence, was just that of a frightened, broken woman. The victory I had won felt hollow, the price of my own vindication, the complete and utter destruction of my family. As the bailiff guided her past our table, my gaze shifted to my son. I looked at Leo, who was frozen in his seat, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a horror that had finally broken through his weakness. He was staring at the empty space where his wife had just been, and in that moment, he finally understood the price of his choices. The judge's voice cut through the stunned silence of the room, sharp and severe. This court finds the petition for conservatorship to be not only without merit, but to be a malicious and fraudulent abuse of the legal process. This case is dismissed with extreme prejudice. He wasn't finished. He glared down at Leo, then at Mr. Peterson, who looked as though he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice resonating with fury, "this court directs the district attorney's office to open an immediate investigation into Ms. Emily Vance for perjury and into Mr. Leo Vance for conspiracy to commit fraud against an elder." The walk out of the courtroom was a blur. The moment the doors opened, we were hit by a barrage of flashing lights and shouted questions from a small pack of local reporters. "Mrs. Vance, is it true your son tried to have you declared incompetent? What do you have to say about the recording?" Susan and Mr. Davies formed a protective wall around me, guiding me through the chaos. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The recording had said it all. In a quieter stretch of the hallway, a figure stumbled towards us. It was Leo, his face streaked with tears, his expensive suit rumpled. He reached for my arm, his touch hesitant. "Mom," he sobbed, his voice choked and raw. I'm so sorry." I looked at him, at the face of the boy I had raised, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just a vast, empty space where a mother's love had once been. The betrayal had carved out a piece of my soul, and I didn't know if anything could ever grow there again. "I know, Leo," I said softly, and it was the truth. I knew he was sorry now that he had been caught. I pulled my arm gently from his grasp and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the cold marble hallway. As we passed through the main lobby of the courthouse, my eyes caught a news screen mounted on the wall. A breaking news banner flashed across the bottom, and I stopped dead in my tracks. The headline was stark and brutal. DA to press charges in shocking conservatorship fraud case. The public reckoning had already begun. Susan guided me out the heavy glass doors and into the clean, bright sunlight. The noise of the courthouse faded behind us. We stood on the steps, taking a breath of fresh air that felt like the first breath of a new life. Susan put a warm, steadying arm around my shoulders. "So," she said with a small, gentle smile, "where to first? The world is yours now." For the first time in months, I didn't know the answer, and it was a wonderful feeling. 6 months after the trial, I sold the house. The process was swift and unsentimental. On the final day, I walked through the empty rooms, the afternoon sun casting long rectangles of light on the bare hardwood floors. The air was filled with the hollow echo of my own footsteps. Standing in the space where our life had unfolded, I could still hear David's laughter, but it wasn't a sad memory anymore. It was a fond farewell, a gentle release. I closed the door behind me for the last time and didn't look back. Now, a year has passed since that day in court. I live in a beautiful condominium overlooking a calm blue lake just outside the city. My mornings are filled with the sound of water lapping against the shore, not the heavy silence of grief. The life I have built here is my own. I reflect on the past year sometimes, on the fallout of that terrible trial. Emily was convicted of perjury and served a 90-day jail sentence that, by all accounts, left her reputation in tatters. Leo filed for divorce and moved to another state, Oregon, I think, to escape the shame. He sends occasional guilt-ridden letters, filled with apologies I read with a detached sadness for the boy he once was. My new life is full. Susan and I took a trip to see the fall colors in Vermont, something we had talked about for 20 years. I've joined a watercolor painting class, and my small balcony is now filled with my clumsy but joyful attempts at capturing the sunset over the water. 3 days a week, I volunteer at a legal aid clinic for seniors, helping them read the fine print on documents and understand their rights. I have used the money from the house to live well, but more importantly, to help others avoid the kind of trap that was set for me. My ultimate victory was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming the peace they tried to steal. This morning, another letter from Leo arrived. I almost set it aside with the others, but this one felt different. Inside was a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of him, smiling a tired but genuine smile, dressed in the simple uniform of a landscaping company. He was standing in front of a garden he had clearly just finished planting. The letter was short. "Mom," it read, "I got a job working with my hands. It's hard, honest work. For the first time, I think I understand what Dad always talked about. I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I haven't earned it yet, but I hope one day I can." I put the letter down on the small table beside me, and a single tear rolled down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of a fragile, unexpected hope. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the lake, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. The air was cool and clean. I raised my glass, not to the past or to what was lost, but to what had been found. I thought of David, of his love and his quiet strength that had guided me even after he was gone. And I thought of myself, the woman who had walked through fire and found peace on the other side. In the quiet of the evening, I whispered to the fading light, "For you, David, and for me." As I watched the sunset paint the lake in hues of orange and gold from my new balcony, I no longer think of the storm I survived, but of the profound calm that has followed. I've learned the hardest and most valuable lesson, that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but the ultimate act of self-respect, and that true victory isn't about revenge, but about reclaiming the peace you refuse to let anyone take from you. In this quiet, my freedom is the greatest treasure I own. I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace?